First of all, I'd like to thank our panelists. Look at these wonderful people who gave their time, came all this way, and I think most are in Ann Arbor, but not everybody. So today we're talking about something very important. This is actually a command performance. Years ago, we had a faith and culture panel, and when we ask for future topics, everybody says, please have the faith and culture panel back. So different people on the panel, so we'll shake things up a little bit. I'd also like to thank my friend and colleague, George Lambrides. George, could you just raise your hand? Thank you. George helped me find these wonderful panelists, and I'd like to thank him. He's gonna pitch hit if I have a migraine or something, because he's really good at moderating things. But as with all of our keynotes, all of our events, this is in place of our keynote this meeting. We'd like to start with the voice of the patient. And so I'm very pleased to introduce one of our POXI members, Llewellyn Drong, who's going to introduce this topic and why it's meaningful to him and to other patients.
Well, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Oh, that's even better. Marvelous. All right, and it is a splendid morning. I looked out the window. Yeah. All right. Well, at the heading of our agenda, it says Culture, Faith, and Difficult Conversations. And it occurred to me that this can be a somewhat difficult topic because I'm going to be talking about the human spirit in what is essentially a scientific group. And that's a bridge that we've all got to build because it's all part of the wholeness of our reality. And I want to emphasize whole as I go through my notes here. Gail, my wife, and I were diagnosed with cancer fairly close together, within a few months of each other. And she died about a little less than 2.5 years ago, and I'm still coping with mine. Hers was squamous cell lung cancer, mine is prostate, and so it goes. But we're intimately acquainted with, notice I still use the present tense with my wife. Isn't that lovely? I love that. Anyway, we're intimately acquainted with the experiential side of all this. And it is, to a very great extent, a spiritual reality. That is, it goes beyond psychology. A good deal of human spirit shapes our psychology. It is not religion. Religion gives a framework for the expression of the human spirit. This has to do with our essential selves, part of what makes us whole. We walked into this with a number of things in our wholeness. We wound up with the diagnosis, understanding of what the illness really meant to ourselves. Well, walked in with our water bills. We walked in with our concerns about our kids and when we're going to be taking the next trip over there. We walked in with a lot of medical information. The ubiquitous clipboard manifested itself. I swear, doctors order those in bulk, but they're everywhere. We walked in with our faith which assists us with things like courage, vision, determination, hope, the things that help us get through a lot of this kind of thing. And when we came home with the essential information and those first dramatic moments of our new reality, we considered together what's important. What's important in with all this information about the prognosis, how far it had advanced so far, what was going to be in our future in terms of the chemotherapies, the radiation, and all that sort of thing. We looked at what was important. What was important was our solid, good marriage, a fabulous network of family and friends, a faith that for us had a track record that worked for us, a sense of purpose for our lives. These were important. The cancer was an obstacle to what was important. And with that, we put cancer in perspective. We have to take care of the cancer, yes, 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 in order to deal with what is important. But somehow, in communicating with medical people, transferring that sense of importance never gets complete, it seems like. There's a strange mitosis that happens when you're talking with doctors and nurses about what's important and about our consequent wholeness, body and spirit. And that mitosis leads to two perspectives about importance that overlap considerably, but they're never quite in phase with each other, never quite intact in terms of getting ideas from one person to the other, from the doctor to the patient, from the patient to the doctor. And it becomes, I think, for the doctor, a problem because he's earnest, he's doing his utmost, and he's trying to connect as best he can. And the patient, to their own spiritual capacity, is trying to do the same thing. We wanted to talk about this with the doctor. We wanted to build a rapport because our spiritual realities shape our attitudes about palliative measures. How much treatment do we want to invest our lives in? How much is going too far? Because these things are defined by what's important. There were two barriers I think I observed as we were coping with this reality, and I still cope with it. One is finding a language suitable for a scientific setting. Two, finding those little windows of opportunity where you can not just start a conversation about importance, but if you've managed somehow to shoehorn your way in, getting that enlarged so you can build the rapport and the patient's investment in the doctor they're putting their trust in builds, the doctor's investment in terms of the patient they're doing their utmost for builds. These are the two things that came to the fore. Language suitable for a scientific setting, a window of opportunity, so that both patient and doctor can address the whole person. All right, so please, if you're moved by the images, the ideas I'm putting out there, hang on to those. Every patient needs whatever you're feeling about this. Every single patient relies upon you for spiritual sustenance, even though you may not be alert to it. Just because you don't know that gravity is working doesn't mean it's not having an effect on you in your life. It's no different for spiritual reality. Now, I have one more thing here. It's almost relevant. And I debated with myself whether to include it or not, and I'm deciding, especially since I've got time with our generous timekeeper, to include it because I think it helps give a really valuable vision. We're accustomed to the language of fighting cancer. Roll up our sleeves and go at it. But I heard this, and when I watched my wife go through what she went through, when I consider what I'm going through, I realized boy, this really touches it so much more intimately. We learned cancer is a dance. The doctor does what the doctor does, but the patient brings their whole being and is the one who dances. Sometimes, as a patient, you lead. Sometimes the cancer leads. Eventually, one of you sits down. When you sit down, it's the whole you. Thank you.
That was poetic, that was moving, that was truth. I'm really moved, and I've promised myself I won't cry anymore, so I'm not going to cry, but that was really profound, Llewellyn. Thank you so much. It really does remind us, doesn't it, that we're here for our patients. If you're interested in learning about how to take a spiritual history, there's actually some instruments in our breakout session. We'll include discussing how to talk to your patients about these issues. A lot of this is in the nursing literature, but there are some tools that you can use. And I know we hate to think about tools when it comes to the spirit, but if you're not used to having these conversations, it's nice to know there are some key questions. And that's what we'll be talking about in the breakout with some of our panel members who can stay. So what I'm going to have the panelists do, I have their names up here because the name tags are not visible, I'm sure, from the entire room, is I'm going to have the panelists go. We'll start with Reverend Smith. Introduce themselves by name, the faith tradition or I guess belief that they represent, and a little bit about their affiliation and what they do. Just a couple sentences each, and the mics, I think, are all live. And then we'll begin. We have some cases that were sent to us. I'd like to thank Dr. Alkiri, my colleague. Can you raise your hand? Al was really helpful in bringing some themes together, and others who contributed cases. So thank you. These are real cases, and they're not being presented by the clinician who presented them. So you'll sort of get the feel for this. Okay, go ahead, Reverend Smith.
Okay. How many of you have heard of TCU, Texas Christian University? Good. I am an ordained minister of the Christian Church, Disciples of Christ, which Texas Christian University is a part of. That helps people because Christian Church, Disciples of Christ is confusing. I'm the Mission Integration Director at Angela Hospice, and no one really knows what that is. If you want to know, I can give you more information. The rest of my background is 20 years as a hospice chaplain or spiritual care coordinator. Thank you.
Greetings, everyone.
Hello.
My name is Kamala Ayubi. I'm an imam and chaplain for Michigan Medicine. Originally from California, I've been in Michigan for 13 years. I'm adjusting to the cold. And my work at Michigan Medicine, it's a broad range that I do, anywhere from NICU to ICU. Any of the units, you can find me there for Muslim patient care as well as general care with the trauma pager. I spend a lot of time in the psych units as well. I do spiritual care groups, and so that's a piece of me.
Hi, everyone. My name is Lauren Tatarsky. I am here representing the growing numbers of folks who consider themselves spiritual, not religious. I have a history both as working in spiritual care as in hospice, also as an interfaith minister, and I have a master's in spiritual guidance from Sophia University. And I also have a long history of social justice work, and I'm an anti-racist organizer in Ann Arbor.
Good morning, I'm Rabbi Robert Doberson. I am currently serving as Rabbi Emeritus at Beth Israel Congregation in Ann Arbor, where I served as rabbi for 30 years up until last year. I am a conservative rabbi, and even though my teachers would immediately yell at me for saying this, just for the sake of argument today, conservative Judaism is halfway between Reform and Orthodoxy in terms of the scale of connection with Jewish tradition. Don't anybody tell my teachers I said that. It's just that it just has to be just the briefest of introductions. But it's my honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to the discussion.
I'm Father Joe Mahoney. I've been assigned by the Archdiocese of Detroit to various hospitals for the last 45 years. First I was at Harper, then I was consulting chaplain for the Archdiocese. Currently I'm assigned to Ascension St. John in Detroit.
Hello, yes, my name is Tony King, and I'm also very honored to be here with these fantastic spiritual leaders. I'm, I suppose, representing, I'm the token Buddhist on the panel. I'm a Dharma coordinator and instructor of Jewel Heart Tibetan Buddhist Learning Center in Ann Arbor, student of Kyabje Gelek Rinpoche, and I also work at the University of Michigan in the Department of Psychiatry, so I'm a staff psychologist in the Anxiety Disorders program, and do some research at U of M.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all of you, for introducing yourselves. We have a case. The way this is going to work is that people who are presenting cases will come to the standing microphones. Dr. Mahmood, I think you have case 1. Dr. Mahmood's daughter is here, so the pressure's really on. And then what we'll do is I'm going to turn to the panel to answer the questions and or at least respond. There is no reason that you yourselves in the audience can't come to one of the standing microphones. If you think you're one of the type of people who projects really well and doesn't need a mic, you're not right. And also, we're videotaping this. So please do come to the microphone. If you don't, our Moxie staff members are going to escort you to a mic. So that's embarrassing. So Dr. Mahmood, you have a case for us.
Okay, this is a 80-year-old black woman. She was admitted to the hospital with acute and severe back pain. She reports having been jumping on the family's trampoline with her great-grandchildren in the backyard and having heard and felt a crunch in her back accompanied by severe pain. Her serum calcium was 11. She was diagnosed with a large left-sided breast mass and metastatic breast cancer to the bones and liver. Her treatment included combination endocrine therapy and a targeted oral treatment, as well as a bone-modifying agent. She had a quick and good response to treatment. At each appointment with her oncologist, she was accompanied by her nephew and 2 of her sisters, as well as at least 1 family friend. Her oncologist had told her that the goal of treatment was to improve her symptoms, to prevent other symptoms, and to control the disease. She was also told that the cancer was a chronic condition and could not be cured. She said she understood what he said. Her sisters would smile, roll their heads back and forth, and look at the floor or across the room. After the interview and physical exam and discussion of the lab results, the entire family would pray over the patient. The patient herself would pray as well. Words of praise were heard through the walls of the practice as the family shouted and danced while the patient sat in her chair or on the exam table. This type of prayer was not familiar to the oncologist, but he would hold hands with the patient and remain quiet with his head bowed slightly. They often prayed for him, he reports, feeling self-conscious. Do you want me to keep going or ask the questions?
Ask the question, the first one, yeah.
Okay. So is there a different way or better way he could have responded?
So Reverend Smith, would you be able to comment on that? This is an interesting situation, right? It's sort of a Pentecostal style of prayer, very loud. It's heard throughout the walls, so this has got to be, can you picture this? Dancing and praising God and that oncologists sort of not feeling comfortable. What are your thoughts?
So I won't try to answer for all of us, but what I would say is I think the doctor's response was very on point. It was very appropriate. In this situation, the patient is the focus. Patient-centered care then would require that the doctor's discomfort be borne so that the patient and the family could feel respected, heard, and that there would be a comfort level between them, that their relationship was strong enough that the doctor would bear and would feel appropriate in that setting. The fact that they were very vocal about their worship style, and this was not something comfortable for the doctor, then is not an issue. It should not be an issue. So I think the doctor responded appropriately.
Okay. Father Mahoney, did you want to comment?
Well, just as an alternative, it would be very appropriate, in my opinion, for this oncologist, so long as there was a level of rapport that really existed with the patient, with the family, so long as they were still, feeling reasonably respected, for him simply to say, I'm not really very comfortable with this, so I will leave you to pray in private, and then I'll come back, I'll come back at the end of your prayer. I would think that that would be, entirely appropriate. It depends on how uncomfortable this particular physician actually was with the situation, or whether he felt like he was disavowing something of his own faith in responding to this particular patient. We run into that very, very frequently in the hospital setting, particularly as chaplains, where we're trying to adjust ourselves to the prayer style of the patient. But if we can't, to be honest with the person and say, gee, I'm not really comfortable with this. For example, we have a particular chaplain who is an imam. He is not comfortable holding hands with the family while they're doing a prayer. So for him simply to say, I'm not really comfortable holding hands, okay, to me is entirely appropriate.
Okay, so a little bit of a different view that keeps the doctor comfortable while still respecting the family. Rabbi, I think...
Yeah, a couple of thoughts on it. First of all, maybe try to come someplace in between these two very valid opinions. First of all, I think sometimes the families do want privacy when they pray. And I think that if you pick up on that, if the oncologist picks up on that, I think it is important to take a step back and even suggest perhaps you'd like to have privacy at this time. I know I've been in situations where families have felt that there was a bit of intrusion into their prayer if there was somebody there who was not part of their particular spiritual community, especially if their clergy happened to be there at the time. But I think that showing a willingness to be part of it if the family wants it is very important. I would add, though, one other thing, and I can't speak for everybody on the panel. I can only speak for myself and a lot of experience I've had with interfaith work and interfaith dialogue, et cetera. To me, the idea of being uncomfortable with a particular form of prayer is not an unusual situation. Being unfamiliar with a particular form of prayer is not unusual at all. And from my perspective, and again, I can only speak from my perspective, I can't say this for everybody, I don't consider it to necessarily be a repudiation of my own faith to be present while there are prayers of a different nature that I'm not used to going on. Now, there may be people who do, and I understand that, and there may be forms of prayer that really do reach that point of being contrary to what a person believes, in which case I think they certainly have to step back. But if it's just a matter of discomfort or unfamiliarity, join the crowd. I think a lot of clergy also find themselves in that situation. And you take a deep breath and you realize that being a passive or even somewhat active by holding hands participant in this means a lot to the family and may be an enriching experience for yourself. So I think that my way of reading this, presuming the family want to be oncologists there, is that that's a great way for that physician to respond, and they shouldn't feel self-conscious. because there's nothing being inferred or nothing to imply from their presence except their support of the family.
Thank you. That was nice integration.
I wanted to also say that I really appreciate the term unfamiliar, and this is a very, I think, respectful, even if a doctor is feeling uncomfortable, a very nice way of expressing that sort of difference is to say that I'm unfamiliar, and as best possible to really express that they have respect for the individuals, even if it's something they're not familiar with.
I like that. Okay, there are a couple more.
So at an appointment 10 months after starting treatment, it was clear that the cancer was markedly worse based on a bone scan and other tests. The patient was overall feeling quite well, reportedly only having fatigue that actually improved when she initially started treatment. She was enjoying time at church with her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. After explaining the scans and what they meant and listening to and answering their questions, the oncologist explained that it would be a good idea to talk about what would happen when the cancer no longer responded to treatment. He was concerned because the disease, which appeared to respond quickly, was now progressing. The oncologist started to have a conversation with the patient and her family about how he would expect her to progress over the next few months to a year. While the family seemed to understand the facts that he was telling them, they did not appear to accept that Mrs. Jones would not survive her cancer. "Our God is bigger than that," said one of the sisters. How do we demonstrate cultural humility while also meeting our responsibilities of telling the truth, and how do we handle the feelings that we might have done something wrong?
Reverend Smith, I'm sorry to turn to you again to be the first speaker on this, but what are your thoughts about cultural humility and truth-telling and this family's discordant understanding, even though the oncologist, we heard earlier from Dr. Mahmood, had already said at the very beginning, this wasn't curative?
I think several things. I think the doctor is responsible for the truth. So to hide the truth, to not speak the truth is not their role. Tell the truth. The fact that the family was not receptive to that truth is not unusual. It's not unusual in the African American community. It's not unusual in general. A lot of people respond with, no, that's not going to happen, when they are told the truth about a terminal illness. What is true about this particular family, given what I've been told about the way that they practice their faith, is that they are aware of what the doctor said. So it's not that they haven't heard the doctor. It's just that they put their faith in something beyond the doctor. They hold on to that because historically, when it came to doctors and medicine and the care of people of color, they couldn't trust the doctor. And so, and that can go across the board in other situations as well. And so they've had to hold on to a hope which told them that they could live no matter what the circumstance is. Some of you may have seen, for example, a documentary called Being Mortal by Dr. Atul Gawande. And there was a woman, and you may have seen a PBS segment about terminal illness, end-of-life care, and taking education into African American communities. And I watched that very carefully because it's my business, it's my work. There was one woman who was so many women that I know in the community who said, "I don't care if I'm dying, I want everything I'm supposed to have." So this speaks to a desire to live, a mistrust of the medical community, and the fact that they aren't sure what the doctor is doing when the doctor tells the truth, which does not mean that the doctor should not tell the truth. So you are just going to have to balance and accept as physicians that the truth may not be heard by all of your patients in the same way, and it is legitimate for people to fight because that's what they do. And the second part of the question?
how do we handle the feeling we've done something wrong? I'll be honest with you, I connect very well with my Black patients. My research is on racial justice and eliminating disparities. I connect so well. And when we get to the point where the best course of action is maximal supportive care, they disappear.
Yeah.
My Black women disappear. I'm a breast oncologist, and I never see them again. And I don't know where they go. They don't answer my calls.
Right.
This is not the case for all of my patients, but it's enough of my patients that I constantly feel, I wrote this question, that, you know, what have I done wrong? And I think, you know, you don't have to raise your hand, but could you nod if this resonates with you, if you're Black? I'm getting some nods, a couple amens. You know, I'm a Presbyterian, but inside I think I'm a Baptist. My grandmother was Baptist. So you know, kind of like a little bit of yes. It's, you know, I think this is why I wanted this to be case one, because I think this is where we feel we constantly fall short. We know that Black patients are less likely to go on hospice. Do you think this is structural racism, that we're, you know, talking about 400 years of slavery and and that mistrust?
The fact that they mistrust hospice?
Yes, yeah.
I think one of the projects that I'm responsible for at Angela under mission integration is taking education about end-of-life care into faith communities. There are two projects. One of them is for faith communities. The other one is specifically for African American churches. When we have taken our 8-hour education into a church and given people the tools to work with, they understand. Without education across the board, when it comes to end-of-life care, when they don't understand, when there hasn't been enough education, they don't trust hospice. And hospice has historically been for white middle-class clients, and it's offered by white middle-class service providers. So there aren't enough of us actually doing the work of hospice. And people in the Black community don't necessarily trust to begin with, so they don't trust what we're saying about end of life, about the possibility of death. So to have the idea that they would gravitate towards this bad news is not really reasonable. There are people who do, but this woman's 80 years old, and her family remembers the history when it comes to end-of-life care, when it comes to care in general. So they aren't necessarily going to gravitate to the bad news, and that doesn't mean you're wrong. It means that history informs their response in the same way that your education, your training, and your whiteness, if that's what it is, informs your teaching. So I'm looking at the world through this skin, these eyes, and you're looking at the world through yours, and we are looking at the world from different perspectives. So to understand that that is a possibility saves you grief. But the other thing I would say to physicians is find a support system, find a place where you can scream, where you can scream, because this isn't going to stop by the time most of the people in here die. So you will be facing these challenges. Find a support system that can hear you scream, and then figure out who you're talking to. Understand the people you are actually caring for as best you can. We're talking about months of relationship here. And it requires a little more energy and a little more effort if you want to work this out. Because the fact that we see the world differently means we're different. And the same.
And part of that is the heritage of Tuskegee, where the federal government lied to people and subjected them to bizarre processes. So now to come and expect that the physician who's telling you that she's telling you the truth can really be trusted. The federal government said that they were telling the truth before, and that didn't happen.
Yes. And so many other wrongs. I want to go to the mic, and then Lauren, I'd love you to comment. So Dr. Zuelke.
I wanted to speak to your comments, Jennifer, and thank you, Reverend Smith as well. I do hospice work and have found that I think part of the reason there's this disconnect is that hospice is seen as something that's taking away your options.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
So
Exactly.
I try to get out there, and obviously they're already admitted to hospice by the time I get out there, but if I'm making a home visit, number one, I'm meeting them on their turf. Number two, so that automatically develops some trust. And number two, trying to paint hospice as something that offers more. But I really think until that disconnect is made, you know, that sense of, well, you're not offering me treatment, you're not offering me hospitalization, you're taking things away from me,
Right.
and sending me off to this nebulous, you know, service. So.
What I would remind you of, I understand the idea that you're on their turf, but historically, old black women lie to you and will tell me the truth. Believe that. Believe that. So keep that in mind, that even though you come into their space, which is admirable, you're still a white woman coming into their space. You may be the first one who's ever done it, and it means something.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Lauren.
What I want to say definitely kind of fills into this, but I know we skipped a question that was specifically about this, so I'll just kind of
please.
run into that. So the question was, this practitioner shared their faith in this case, albeit with a different style. What would you recommend if he did not consider himself a person of faith? So I think this really ties in, and I think the word style is really interesting, because when I read this case, I really can relate to what Diane was sharing, which is it sounded actually like the reaction that we've been trained in as white people, to that whiteness trains us to be really zipped up, right? To hold back expression. Many cultures around the world, including here in this country, Black culture, is this like celebratory expression is deeply part of spirituality. And so I think when we run into our discomfort, kind of going to what Rabbi Dapperson was saying, as white people, that actually we can question that in ourselves as our own training in response to this kind of really deep, expressive form of spirituality. And so I think that being able to sit with that discomfort and move through it and seek connection, because what's actually happening is our discomfort is preventing us from connecting in that moment. And that is actually something that we've been trained in, just as a lineage of white people, to respond to this kind of expression in that way. And not only does that prevent us from connection, but it can actually be perceived as oppressive. So our shutting down can be perceived as an oppressive statement. So to be able to move through a discomfort and really join in connection, and as a spiritual, not religious person, I find myself always seeking, like, what feels sacred here? What is the energy of sacredness that is here? And the words can be fairly unnecessary in the sense of what I can connect to. So what I'm connecting to in this story is this like deep, profound, celebratory spirit, and I can feel that in my body if I'm present to it, right? And so it doesn't mean that I have to connect to the words, it doesn't mean I have to connect to the tradition, it doesn't mean that I have to find a way to relate to this particular spiritual theology, but I can feel a sense of connection if I allow myself to be present, and I can feel kind of tapped into what is sacred and what is there. So I think when it comes to having to have a particular faith tradition, I'm saying, like, let's look for what is sacred. And I think what is sacred is something we can all connect to and we can all feel. And that's what I'm looking for in this experience.
Were you trying to give me goosebumps?
I have a comment. I wonder how many of you as clinicians feel that permission to, feel the sacred with those who you're treating. Because I'm thinking about, how you're talking about using the spiritual screening tools with or to your patients. But, would there be discomfort for you to be screened spiritually, you know, or to screen yourselves and think about, well, what do I think about spirituality? How does it fit into me being an oncologist? I don't know. Okay, the Reverend said, you know, a space to scream, but also a space to screen.
Nice, it's a meme.
You're a clever guy.
So to go through that sort of wilderness of sorting out, you know, how do I feel about my own theology as a practitioner? In order to get into the space of, okay, I can connect and still be conscious that, you know, I have my healthy boundaries, but I'm also like, this is part of being human as a person walking through a treatment experience with my patients, you know, and how would that enrich my practice? You know, things like that. So I don't know if that's a norm, is it?
Are you saying that self-knowledge makes us better care providers? Is that what I'm picking up?
Maybe.
That sounds kind of like an ancient wisdom, right?
Yeah. I think my Buddhist over there is like, you know, pretty happy.
Well,
we have a question from the mic.
Hi, Harmesh Naik. I want to first make a comment and give you a background, but I had a case 8 to 10 years ago that's for me has been an incomplete spiritual mission, and you can say it's gut-wrenching that I have not been able to get it out of my system. But to echo what Imam said is spirituality, I use it not only to guide my patients and my families, but every day spirituality for me as an oncologist is my escape from whenever I'm stricken with grief by seeing my patients and families through, grieving and going through hard time. And I'm a Hindu by religion, but at my hospital, the Felician nuns see me so many times in the chapel praying that they have joked that, Dr. Naik, you are half Catholic by now anyway. And I have said that, you know, when I'm in the chapel in front of Jesus, I'm thinking of Lord Vishnu being there. So, and also I want to make a comment that Dr. Mahmood's case, you know, so many of my families have asked me to join the prayer, and some of them have taken the pictures. And after the patient has passed away, when families come and talk to me, and they show me the picture and say, Dr. Naik, this has been the most revered memory in our family and our minds, and this is what got us through, and we appreciate you holding the hand. So I am a big fan of space program and have watched so many movies and real-time videos of the space shuttle, and visited Houston's space shuttle mission control room and Huntsville's and etc. So I think of every patient, particularly at the time of death, as a mission very similar to space shuttle mission directors thinking that I must get those astronauts back. And I must tell you that I have actually talked to astronauts when I visited the Kennedy Center, that whenever this particular case for me is very similar to mission incomplete, just like those two mission directors of the shuttle. So this is a woman I had taken care of for 18 months with very serious metastatic cancer who was paralyzed, but responded amazingly to treatment by our medical criteria, and she would have died in X number of months by median survival, and she lived for 18 months, always came to see me in wheelchair, and then, you know, she had gotten several, I think 3 series of chemotherapies in that situation, milder versions, and I kept thinking all this time, and I had just absolutely no hint of what was going through her mind. She's always willing to try treatment. After 3 treatments, cancer progressed, and I had serious conversation, and she readily agreed to hospice. Prior visit, she had told me that she'll take 2 weeks. So this is a visit. She's coming to see me 2 weeks. She tells me that I'm ready for hospice and very sad. And I keep asking her, how can I help her? And I have always tried to honestly communicate, and this patient says, Dr. Nayak, this is my last visit. I came to say goodbye to you, and I must tell you something. And I said, sure. And she says that my whole life has been completely wasted, and this 18 months has been complete torture and a wasted time, and I'm sorry to have wasted your time as well. And it just instantaneously broke my heart. And I have patients waiting, but I felt need to talk to this woman. So I'm completely blank, so I started telling her that how I saw her life and how our engagement for 18 months has been meaningful. And one of the most things I have found helpful in this kind of situation is for me to verbalize how she has inspired me and how I found what I learned from her. And whatever comes at that point, I'm telling her. And I said, you know, I will say a prayer for you, and I don't see your life wasted, and this is what I learned from you. And this is how I can see your life has been very, very meaningful. And she says, thank you for trying to make me feel better, but nothing you say is going to change my mind. So I'm, again, completely lost. And I said, listen, you have made this decision. I completely support the decision. And I thought I would try saying that maybe God needs you more. So he has asked you to make this decision so he can have you in heaven when you are ready. And he will have definitely some agenda for you where you will be helping God achieve some objective that me or you right now just don't know. And she would not subscribe to that as well. And she says, Dr. Nayak, you have patients waiting. You need to attend to them. This is how I feel, and this is how I feel. And nothing you try to tell me is going to change this. And I said that I'm going to say a prayer for you, and I'm sure you will have God show you the way. And I'm convinced that when I come to heaven, you are going to tell me a different story, that whatever came to you after this meeting was meaningful, and I would really wait to meet you there so you can tell me that. And I have tremendous sort of guilt feeling that I had failed spiritually to let this woman I don't know, feel somewhat meaningful, and I'm completely lost. And for me, it is like those two space shuttle mission directors. They had failed mission, and it's never going to be successful. And somehow, I do not want to repeat the mistake. So fortunately, I have this wonderful panel, and I would like each of you to help me out. What could I have done differently? Or if I'm faced with this situation again, what should I do differently next time? And what did I do wrong? Or what is a way out of this to make the person feel worth her life or his life? Thank you.
Who would like to address deep listening and validation?
Well, I want to address the second question. As for the first question, I want to say that I don't know what could be done differently, and I mean that. There's a question here that we were talking about, though, which I think is really salient to your question, is how do we handle the feeling that we've done something wrong? Exactly. Either in the first case of Ernestine or in the beautiful case that Dr. Nye described, this feeling that somehow we haven't met the patient, or we've had some failing, or we weren't adequate, or whatever it might be. I personally, and because this fits both with the idea of clinician self-care, but also, as Dr. Giggs and Imam was saying, this idea of self-knowledge. And I think it's a valuable opportunity. And I think what possibly could be helpful is to really do what you're doing now, to be questioning about this, what can I do? And to notice, I mean, from the Buddhist perspective, there's this idea of self-knowledge, or at least acknowledging what feelings and thoughts you're having, and noticing how it's sometimes difficult to really acknowledge them, but if you don't, they tend to hang around. You know, they tend to become, sources of rumination or of self-doubt. So I think moving into that with an openness of heart of what what was this? How did I do wrong? How is it that I'm feeling that I've done wrong, or that I haven't been sufficient? But also, I think recognizing a certain level of that you're not alone in that. And I would say maybe thinking, how would you talk to a friend, another clinician? Because I just see, well, I guess this may be more the psychologist in me as well as the Buddhist, is that we tend to be much harder on ourselves than on other people. And identifying, this sense of self-criticism and being open to it, and being open to the fact that we are all fallible, we all make mistakes, and I also think connecting with what was your motivation. Your motivation sounds incredibly compassionate. And so from that sense, even if you feel that you were not successful in changing her, I'm not sure that's a problem. I mean, honestly, I think this may have been sort of where she was at. That's my personal opinion. But this idea of using these moments of how to handle, I just like the way this question is, how do we handle the feeling? And I think one way to handle the feeling is to really grasp it, to use it as an opportunity for deepening our self-knowledge.
I just want to add one point, and I've been thinking about it since you told the story, and it sounds like that I'm trying to make excuses, and I'm not. The fact that the patient trusted you enough and felt that she had the relationship with you to say that to you is an indication of the relationship that you had created with her, and maybe that's the thing to walk away with, the sense of satisfaction in that way. Maybe that's the right word, but the idea that there was enough of a relationship, because a lot of patients wouldn't say that. They would just not show up, but the fact that the patient opened up to you shows something of great value that you did.
And I wonder too, what would have been the dynamic if you said, okay, you're going into hospice, I'll step by and see you next week when you're in hospice. And just that you're not breaking contact with her totally. I'm just wondering what that might have had as a reaction to her. She's coming saying, this is my last appointment. Okay, this can be our last appointment. I'm going to step by and see you next week.
So my personal feeling about that is that I don't want to make the patient promise that I'll see you again if I'm not sure I'm going to be able to go to hospice. That would be my thinking at that time.
Okay.
So one thought I'm having, and it's related to perfectionism too, is so sometimes I think people need space to be able to feel like things have been meaningless. And it's really hard, I think, to hold that space when we've been in part responsible for trying to create meaning and possibility. So I think, this is a very hard and painful conversation, so there's no one answer. I think my instinct might have been to say, to be able to hold the pain of what she's saying with her, that it has felt like so much painful work and that it has felt meaningless, and to be able to sit with her in that experience. And what I notice sometimes is when people are given the opportunity to say how painful and what a loss it's been and how the day-to-day has felt treacherous, that underneath that release might be noticings of other things that also existed, right? So to allow her to process through some of that and perhaps likely actually arrive where, oh, but I do remember this one conversation I had with my sister, right? Or there was this moment, right? And I find that when people are given the chance to really name their pain and have someone just sit in their pain with them, like, wow, it must be so hard to think that the last 18 months have been meaningless, that sometimes that creates actually an opening where she might have her own answers to that. And that actually right there also dismantles our perfectionism, right? Because it's this willingness not to have the answer right away or not to be able to fix it. And I've heard that medical training in particular is really good at training us to be perfect. And so I really have compassion to all of you for that, because I think we live in a culture that does that already. And then on top of that, being in a training that really kind of gives you or enforces this narrative that you have to be perfect and that you can somehow be perfect all the time, right? That you have the tools and to remind ourselves that we are actually all working on some level of mystery all the time is maybe helpful.
Thank you. How many of you would say that you have a sense you can't mess up, or that you mess up all the time, or it's easy to screw up? Can I have some nods or amens? So I relate to that all the time. I want to, the validation statement you said, that must be really hard. Mm-hmm. Sometimes if you don't know how to do that, I found tell me more is enough. Mm. So just tell me more, or say more can help people. And just that radical listening. Yeah, what else? Dr. Nayak, thank you for sharing that. That was really brave, and I hope the discussion's been helpful, but that's the kind of thing that kind of have to radically accept it happened and then practice self-forgiveness. And you and I can talk about it later if that would be helpful.
I would love to too. That's a very, thank you so much for opening up about that. There's just this one thing I want to say about like the spiritual screening and self-awareness. Like I just saw that you were really motivated by hope and faith, and she was really going in a place that is different. And so it was like a tug of war. A power struggle. And so just being aware of your motivation, that you are motivated by hope, but what are some of the traps of that too? That not everyone's gonna be on that page, and can you live with that sometimes? How do you live with that? That people will not be on the same page as you all the time. It's worked sometimes. That time it was just really, the contrast was so strong, and you were caught by, it seems you were caught by surprise.
Well put. I'm going to jump to the third case. I know Dr. Said has case number 2, but we're going to go to case number 3 next. I'm watching the clock, and I think there's a lot in case 3.
Hi, my name is Chris Mans. I'm a physician actually from the University of Pennsylvania, so a little further away from here.
Thank you for coming all this way for our conference.
Yes, so I've been working with Penn to improve our communication between clinicians and patients about end-of-life care in particular. And so I've been speaking with Dr. Griggs, and it's a privilege to be here and to learn about the efforts that you guys have been doing here in Michigan. As an aside, my grandfather was a Reformed minister in at Third Reformed Church in Holland, Michigan for many years, and then was a hospice clinician or hospice chaplain after his retirement.
Who knew?
So the case I have for you is as follows. There's a 54-year-old woman, Joanne Chapman, who had been diagnosed with ovarian cancer and ultimately had progressive disease and was admitted to hospice. She had grown up Roman Catholic, but had stopped going to church after she married Gary, who had grown up Protestant. They had both been very observant prior to their marriage, but they were unable to find a place of worship where they were both comfortable. Joanne found comfort in praying the rosary in the last few weeks of her life. The hospice chaplain and she had long conversations. Gary was able to connect with old friends from the church where he'd gone before graduate school and found support in those friends. Their only child, a 21-year-old son, Alex, came home from college to be with his mother and felt, quote, completely lost. He was angry that the God that his parents seemed to find very helpful had not been a part of his life. They caused friction between him and his father, and he didn't think it was fair for him to talk about his concerns with his mother. So what kind of feelings do you see in families when situations like this arise?
Father Mahoney, would you like to
great.
respond? Well, we've got a Roman Catholic woman praying the rosary, right?
Yeah. No, the first thing that occurs to me with this was just to suggest to the son that he maybe sit down and talk with his mom about what she finds meaningful in faith, and let her explain what's been helpful or what's not been helpful. That might be an opening to an understanding, maybe even with his dad. But it's not like he's missed out on everything in life, but she's telling him of something that could be very nice that he might want to start exploring, you know, on his own. Just to open up, kind of like open up a door a little bit.
Is that fair for her? Is that fair? I'm just...
To her?
To her. You know, she's dying, she's, you know, she's concentrating.
I think she might welcome it.
Okay.
Mom, what does faith mean to you? She might enjoy expressing that part of her life to him. If she finds the rosary meaningful, she finds prayer meaningful, she finds the return to the church meaningful, she may be very open to sharing that with her son. This is just off the top of my head.
Yeah, no, it's, I like that. How about others of you? Have you seen this in your practice?
I would agree that focusing on the opportunity, as Father mentions here, I mean, this must be a big surprise. So acknowledging Alex's dismay or confusion, I think, is important. And the sense of loss. So he's saying, I've got this huge loss. You've kind of been holding back from me this really juicy stuff. And now Mom's dying. And so there is a sense of loss for sure. But I agree with Father. I think there's a great opportunity here to connect. And, you know, probably to the extent that Mom is able to, I think she could share doing the rosary together, or just expressing like what is this spirituality. I also think I'm not sure if the medical staff, but possibly a chaplain could reach out to Alex in a very open-minded way, and saying, you know, I'm interested in what this is like for you, seeing the depth of help that spirituality brings to your parents. What do you think about this? Or would you like to discuss about spirituality?
He's angry. There's some anger here too.
Yeah.
And he's showing it with Dad, but not with Mom. What are your thoughts about that, any of you?
My initial reaction, and you know, I'd have to be in his presence probably to get more, but my initial reaction is the anger is a response to like this sense of loss or this sense of disconnect, right? And that kind of the anger is the way that it's being expressed, but actually what's being said is like, I have no anger, right? Anchor, sorry, not anger. And this is confronting this feeling of like that I need some ground. I need some ground. I'm looking for some ground. And so my question might be like, when was a time that you felt ground? Like when was the time in your do you have a memory or a sense of a time where you felt the kind of spiritual support that you're looking for right now? What was that like? Were you in nature? Were you with someone you were deeply connected to? What was that like? How did it feel? What felt true about that moment? So because I believe actually that we all experience this at moments in our lives, and I believe Alex knows what he's searching for and has experienced it at some point, so maybe helping him tap into moments that he has had that experience at some point.
That's really helpful. It seems like, let's say, you know, the son is present and the hospice team picks up on this. It sounds like something one would want to explore and unroof.
I think in my role as spiritual care, I would also go after what about relationships with the parents has been meaningful, as opposed to going after the debate. And because he's angry, but underneath that, he's hurt, he's scared, he's whatever else. So approaching it so that he gets to scream, I believe in that word, so that he gets to scream and come down from what's going on in his head to what's going on in his gut, because he's losing his mother. And God is the perfect target. As our spiritual care staff, we often get that too. So helping him get out of his head and come down to this place of, I'm losing my mother. Yeah.
That's very moving. Do you see this in your work, all of you? Do you see this disconnect, Rabbi?
I was just going to say, this is a bit of a stereotype, but I'll say it anyway, because I think it's true a lot of the times. I don't think you can compare necessarily the openness to spiritual issues for a 54-year-old woman who's dying with a 21-year-old who hasn't been exposed to a religious, in this case, lifestyle. I mean, it's just they're in completely different places. And I think the word you used, anchor, is really an important word, because I know for our community, our synagogue community, we'd like to think that we don't take any theological litmus tests of people who are involved, and a lot of people are involved in the community just because they need an anchor, and they need some people to talk to, and they need some people to be with. So that would be my advice, in addition to everything else, is not only what's the relationship with your parents, but where's your support system? Forget about spirituality for the moment. Who do you count on? Who do you belong to? Where, what organizations, whatever? Because to me, this issue is one issue, but in terms of how he's feeling and feeling completely lost, that may not be a spiritual question. That may just be I have no friends, I have no support, and that's an important issue. So,
yeah, connection is such an essential
Yes.
human need, right? It's in the Maslow hierarchy of needs. We have time for one more case, and I think instead of my choosing it, would the panel like to choose between case 2 and case 4? And y'all have to agree. That'll be fun.
We have to agree?
That'll be fun.
And how
right?
much time do we
watch
have?
this. The Rowdown.
I think I won't vote.
Cage match. 6 went in and 1 came
Two.
out.
I'm thinking 2.
Two.
Two?
Less of.
Okay, so Dr. Seid, I think you had case number 2, if you can come to the mic. Yes, your voice does carry, but you heard me before. Thank you.
Thank you. Rabbi, I just want to say hello. It's been years.
Yeah.
We shared my father for many years.
Oh.
So I'd like to say hello to you.
We'll talk afterwards.
FK is a 78-year-old widower, originally from Lebanon, and he was receiving care for metastatic bladder cancer. The medical oncology team tried repeatedly to engage the patient in a discussion about his goals of care. His 4 children, all of whom lived nearby, did not want prognosis or even the details of his diagnosis discussed bluntly with him, because they thought this would strip away all hope. They wanted to be intimately involved in every aspect of decision-making, medical decision-making, that is.
So the question is, how do we balance individual decision-making discussions with surrogates, like family members, including children and spouses, with their decision-making process? And I think, Imam, you were going to talk about that, particularly since the gentleman's from Lebanon, right? And we tend to group Middle Eastern cultures together, and I think you had some thoughts and feelings about that.
Well, listening to the case being read out loud, there's some interesting points. One is that the mom has died, the mother in the family has died, and so I was starting to think about the grief of the kids in the sense of like a lack of control. Oh, we want to control the situation. It just came to mind. And how they respond through that grief to sort of manage this family, which also speaks to like narratives that families come with. You know, what is their family style? What is their family system uniquely? There are many Muslim families, of course, I've interacted with hundreds, and it's always different. And coming, you know, we had this thing about doing it right. We want to understand this culture. We want to understand these people. But it's like putting that down for a minute and to say, what are the dynamics in this family? How can I learn from this family? What's important to this family? What's important to the individual who's being treated? But then how is that showing up? We can often have a bias, you know, well, autonomy first. You know, this individual's choice is what's important in my value system. So it's probably the same thing with this family's value system. And just allowing them to teach you, allowing the father to teach you what's important to you. So that's the beginning, you know. There could be many pieces, the language barrier, but getting to the core of what's important to this dad. And that can be tough sometimes because, again, that grief of the children to control the situation. No, don't talk to my dad gets in there. So how do you get to the truth as a clinician of who are the people here, what's important to them, and especially for the patient, but also for those in the family unit. So those are my first thoughts.
Rabbi, I think you had a couple comments about families and idiosyncrasies.
My only comment was that I don't think this is a matter of religion. I don't think it's a matter of ethnic background, of whatever. Families are families, and you'd be very surprised we shouldn't be surprised when individual families have their own way of dealing with things that may or may not fit into our idea of what we would expect from a particular fill-in-the-blank, religion, whatever it might be. I mean, I've had people say to me, and I'm sure others here on the panel have, people say to me about somebody else, boy, that's not the way Jewish families are supposed to respond to things. You know, it's like, who are you to say what's going to be the rule for everybody? So I do think that I just add that piece to it. I know that I think the most important thing is to have some ground rules from the beginning with families. Who's talking, who's listening, who's making the decisions, but not to be surprised at something that is not necessarily what you expected to find, because every family is different. Every patient is different.
Do you think that's particularly the case with older patients, where the family members, the children might be more likely to be involved in
I would think that it's more likely,
decision-making, or is that again, you know?
I think it's true for everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, it's true for anybody who has any, you know, everyone's different.
Yeah.
And I think everybody has to be taken as an individual, with the understanding that there are certain, perhaps cultural aspects that do play into. We've been talking about some of them, and they're very valid, but still, there are always going to be exceptions, and people are always going to be individuals and are always going to act in a certain way, and we have to be ready to deal with that.
Yeah, and there is this ethical piece, the ethical piece of trying to get to the voice of the patient. Who do you want information? Who do you want to have that information? Do you want the information? Do you want your children to handle it? I've interacted with a family recently where the son, this is end-stage cancer, and the son was a pharmacist, you know? So it's like, yeah, I trust my son. Talk to him.
In terms of knowing prognosis, I mean, I do also respect that there's a tension between some cultures where I've heard that it's common for the patient not to be given a prognosis, a very bad prognosis. The family is told. The tension of that with what Reverend Smith beautifully said, that as the professional, the physician has the charge of truth-telling. And so one thing that I was just wondering is how to approach that charge or that duty of truth-telling. And I think there's maybe a variety of ways that one can do it. And I was actually thinking about coming toward it more kind of from an actuarial standpoint. That given what I'm seeing here, many people, experience this, which is delivering truth, but it's also in a sense opening up space for miracles to occur, which sometimes I guess they do. But in this family, it's challenging because,
Do you have a follow-up question?
I do. What are ways we can talk about hope in someone who won't survive their cancer?
This will be our final discussion point. So thank you very much for presenting the case. So hope in somebody who's not going to survive their cancer.
Going back to that first case, one of the questions was that we could have considered was the role that hope plays in their not receiving the doctor's news. Yes, the doctor's news. And when, if ever, could we have asked questions or offered education earlier in the case? I think one thing that I have done historically in hospice is begin with what are you hoping for? And if they don't know what they're hoping for, if they can't articulate it then, that's still something they might be thinking about. The other thing is to bring up the possibility of, if in fact what you are hoping for cannot come, what else would you be open to? What else might be a space, a place where you would feel you have accomplished something, or another scenario you would welcome? Or are there things that would be meaningful to you to do?
Thank you. Others?
I have one thought I'd like to share. Okay. Once you get this all worked out in terms of the arrangements with the family, arrangements with the patient, communication, all the rest of that, something that I have never seen in 45 years of chaplaincy is the oncologist including it in his note, putting simply in a few sentences about, gee, this patient really wants to communicate through his son, or the patient's primary decision maker is da-da-da, or the patient only wants to speak to the physician in private, or this particular family member is not to be a part. I mean, when the patient then comes in the hospital, okay, that would help clue in other consultants, that would help clue in the other participants in the care team, chaplains, social work, nursing staff. That would allow us to not have to start over again from scratch when the patient comes in the hospital. So that was just a thought.
Yeah.
Is it anybody's common practice to put that type of information in when you're putting down all the medical details? Because I've never seen it.
I'll put it in my note, but it only goes in the initial note. So I also had a patient who knew she had stage 4 cancer, that it was not curable, that she was going to die of it, but she didn't want it brought up. So every note was in bold at the top. The patient knows she has incurable disease, that she will die of her disease. She does not want this discussed in bold at the top of every note, because
great, I've never seen that.
Who knew what note would be opened when she got admitted to the hospital?
Yeah.
So that feels like something one could put at the top of every note. You know, we cut and paste.
Just what are the dynamics?
Goodness knows what else.
Is there good rapport with the patient on the part of the oncologist?
Yeah,
this was just a thought.
Yeah, I think all of us would like that if our doctors did that, right? Like Dr. Griggs does not want this in her top, list of problems that she snores, whatever. So others of you, hope is such a thing with wings, right?
Yes.
I thank you all for your service. All this, you have to navigate through all this, all these charts, all these. Thank you for your service. One thing I think about in terms of hope is when a family comes to a clinician, okay, they're placing to a great extent hope in the doctor, right? They're placing hope in medicine because that's the one in front of them. They're not going to the temple right now, they're coming to the hospital. So navigating, that aspect of where you perceive this patient or family is putting their hope, but also who steps into the room can shape that, right? When a chaplain steps into the room, when an imam steps into the room with a religious or with a family, how do they respond? Do they gravitate that direction? Do they say, I don't want to talk with the imam. I don't want to talk with the clergy. I want to talk with you. So their focus it's going to indicate where their hope. Or they say, oh yes, there's much more to life than getting a cure. There's actually a hereafter that I've really held in my heart all these years. And by an imam showing up, or a priest or a reverend showing up, a spiritual person showing up, it gives them that ability to express, as the gentleman eloquently said, this other part of who they are, as an expression of their hope that takes that burden off of the clinician to a great extent, as being the source, the sole source of hope is the annihilation of cancer or overcoming the cancer. So it's again that dance that he was talking about. Who is this patient and family dancing with? Can we give that opportunity for them to show?
Thank you for referring back to Llewellyn's introduction. That was very nice, the dance. Others of you, we have a couple more minutes.
I think this is really related to what you were saying, but I think this question to me, it can't be disconnected from grief, from the process of coming to the awareness of one's mortality sooner rather than later. So, the way this question is framed, it makes me think that hope is relegated to like living. To like the hope was reliant upon there being a chance to live. So when we're faced actually with death, that this is just a deep process, right? So I'm less maybe interested in the moment of seeking where the hope is now, and more interested in how is it that we process through the reality of our own death, and then leading to how do we want to do that work? Like, how do we show up to the last few months or weeks of our lives? What is valuable and meaningful and needed during that time? And maybe that becomes that source of hope. But for me, it's like the question of hope there is actually a shift into like, how do we process this new time and this new awareness, and what does that mean for how we spend those days?
That is a wonderful way to end. I would like to thank our panel members, and I wish we had time for more interaction. The breakout session is exactly what that's for. So a few of our panel members will be staying and taking a deeper dive into this, which will be a really nice opportunity if you want more, because I always do. But thank you very, very much.